You know what I want? I want a smoke, man.
Hey, how's it going? Samson Folk here with the Raptors Weekly Podcast. In this episode, a very special one because I'm bringing on a dear friend, somebody I talk to, I guess, every day for many, many days in a row, and somebody who his commentary on basketball I find insightful. His jokes and memeage I find just cutting edge. Hoop Goose, a person who crafted a Twitter account where he talked about basketball, and the result was him saying, well, I'm from Canada, and I guess that the Canadian Goose is a signifier of such. So how else will I communicate that I'm a Canadian guy who loves basketball besides the Hoop Goose name, the figurehead? How's it going, man?
I'm great. And I love that intro. It really paints me as a man of the people.
Yeah. Well, a man of the people, absolutely. And so we talked this summer, and we just because you have so many interests around basketball that go beyond the Raptors, and we talked about the draft. And we also talked a little bit about the Pascal Siakam discourse, the Pascal Siakam dialogue that was going on about what the Raptors should be doing and how the roster was constructed heading into next year. And you and I were kind of on the same periphery with slight disagreements around what his future might look like. And now we're sitting here, you know, like maybe 6-7 months removed from that. And now we're having this conversation. What do you think about, in the short form, the Raptors so far this year, and maybe anything that surprised you as far as what they've built and how it's turned out?
Well, I think you and I were pretty close on what we expected the Raptors to be, which was not very good. And I think in terms of that, we've been, I think, wrong per se, because I feel like the entire core has kind of overperformed this year. Like, well, relative to what you expect, I think Fred has been better than at least what I thought. Pascal has been better than what I thought. Gary has definitely been better than what I thought. Even guys like Scotty and Precious, I think, have overperformed what people expected. OG too, he's been good. So it's like maybe we underestimated the amount of growth that would happen, or maybe how much Tampa was holding them back. But I think they've been better than what I expected, at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think if you're saying Pascal, Fred, that whole glut of guys is overperforming relative to what you expected, I think that Fred is certainly not overperforming, I guess I wouldn't say. He's improved. He's improved to a point that I didn't see coming. Pascal is about where I would have expected as far as impact. But I'm obviously somebody who's been really high on Pascal for a long time. OG may be coming in a little bit under where I might have expected, but that doesn't mean he hasn't improved. There's still a lot of markers that he's hitting that he was supposed to hit with this extra usage. And then, as you say, like Scotty and Precious and Gary, those guys just obviously, as far as what they're giving, you know, it oscillates between the three of them, but defensively and offensively, there's a lot of punch that they're giving that wasn't expected. So as far as them being better than not so great, is there anything you're expecting, you know, heading into the rest of the season that you want to see change for this team to kind of see out these over performances or improvements that the regular guys on the roster have made?
Well, we were right that the bench kind of sucks, because it does. So I think just adding just some sort of help there so that the lead doesn't, like, the points just bleed when the starters are off the floor, and then they have to work hard, and then everyone on Twitter calls them chokers or fake comeback people. So I feel like it'd be nice if we just had some bench reinforcements, or maybe the bigger move would be a center, which maybe we can talk about in terms of some targets there. But the number one thing for me is the bench.
Okay. And so let's do the thing let's pay service to your idea of what Fred VanVleet was coming into the season and who he is. You and I had agreed that last year, Fred deservedly probably deserved the rank of best Raptor on the team. And now he's gotten to a point where the 3-point shooting, obviously catch and shoot, he's at 48% on super high volume. The pull-ups aren't a super crazy percentage, but they're enough to change how teams play him. And his overall impact as far as winning minutes has been enormous, bigger than anybody has had, I think, by like the catch-all numbers than anybody as a Raptor ever. Like the catch-alls love Fred VanVleet. The Raptors win minutes with him on the floor. They crater with him off the floor. Less so with Pascal, rounding into form, but definitely, a trend over the year. And so Fred VanVleet, hopefully an all-star, but you were always rooting for him. You were always saying how good he was and underrated he was. So I just like kind of your thoughts on his season so far, actually.
I think Fred has been awesome. The biggest thing is that he's kind of having, I don't really see people talking about it, but he's kind of having like an all-time level shooting season because he's shooting like 10 threes a game. Even if you look recently, he's like way up there in the 3-point attempts. It's like 15 sometimes, especially when Gary was out, and he's like hitting them near like a 40% clip, which is it's like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson territory. And I think that's the biggest thing. The other thing that he's done really well this year is be like an on-ball guy, but that's still not, I wouldn't say it's like a huge strength of his. But even last year, I think I was defending him when people were like, "Oh, he's not a point guard at all. He's just a shooting guard." But maybe people go too far with these things because even last year, I know you said that you didn't love his playmaking, which I think was fair, but I still thought it was good enough as a point guard. And this year, he's been a lot better, especially in terms of finding passes maybe on the interior and working with not so great role men. Even like, I know Cam hasn't played in a while, so he probably looks worse than he is, having to deal with Precious every night. But yeah, I think Fred has been meaningfully better, both inside the arc in terms of decision making. I think he's made a leap in terms of like mid-range shooting, but he hasn't been doing that as much recently. So I don't know what's going on there. Maybe because he's like the only 3-point shooter on the team, so we can't have him all in the mid-range. But yeah, in terms of just shooting and being a ball handler, he's been better than what I expected.
Well, the playmaking is the big one, I think. And so for a long time, I think that his playmaking was below average to functional. Like he'd have some functional games as the lead ball handler, and he'd have below average games as the lead ball handler as far as what he creates for his teammates. But this year, I think that, or this season, I should say, I think that he's hit a range where it's either functional or above average. And that is a really, really high clip to hit. And that's a huge step to take at this juncture in his career. He's gone from 26-ish to 27-ish. And to become that type of passer, I think is super impressive. What you bring up too is just because it looks different, Fred VanVleet, is that he's the lead guard. He takes, he has by far the most touches on the team, but he also hits like a low frequency relative to Steph Curry as far as like pull-ups historically or other really great shooters. And that's where the disconnect is, right? Because you look at a guy like, even Bradley Beal or a guard who spends a lot of time on ball, when they have a big 3-point shooting game, typically it's the product of pull-ups. And you can kind of, you see the highlight reel playing out of a lot of your favorite shooters hitting pull-up jumpers, especially over this past 10 years. Whereas Fred does have those, he's still hitting lots and lots of catch and shoot threes, which is a big product of him being able to move off ball. And that's the thing, is like it mirrors Steph Curry closer than it does a lot of other players, but it's not Steph Curry. So people are hesitant to make that comp. You weren't. And you're saying like, hey, this guy's shooting roughly 40% from three on an insane amount of volume. And why not just like stand in it and say, this is a guy having one of the best shooting seasons out there currently. And given where the league is right now, that's historic. That's really interesting. The defense, just the quick sell on Fred VanVleet's defense, how you think it impacts the Raptors and all that.
I think there's a good argument that he's been the best defender on the team. Maybe not like every game, because recently it's probably not been him, but he's just able to do so much in terms of being like a menace on the ball. He has like these big meaty claws whenever they rotate down, and the bigs are always scared because they don't see him coming. He just comes and he just takes the ball from them. Like, where'd the ball go? And then just in terms of rotations and like leading the defense, he's probably up there. I don't know. I think he's up there with any guard in the league in terms of defense. So I'd say he's his usual elite self on that end.
Okay. And as far as like, this is, we poke fun in when we talk about like you being very, very much enthralled with like the analytics side of basketball. And I like the analytics side of basketball, and, so do you, but, you get into your jokes and it becomes, that's what you joke about. But like Darko, EPM, catch-alls, Raptor, LeBron, whatever. For the people who are just hearing these names and saying, that sounds like the team he plays for and a player in the league, and then a guy who was drafted, after LeBron, and then, like, what are these words? And they're catch-all numbers. And so if I could ask you to, I want like you to try and explain the correlation between Fred VanVleet on court and why he is so impactful in those numbers. I think that would be an interesting thing.
All right. Yeah. So these all-in-one numbers are a relative recent thing, I think, in basketball, like maybe like the last 5 years or so, or when they really took off. Before that, you had like RPM and like RAPM. Oh, I'm just throwing out letters, so I don't know if people are gonna get it. but what it is that the nerds are trying to like understand what's going on in a given game without I don't know. I want to say without. I want to say with all the information that we currently have. But it's really hard to quantify basketball versus other sports like baseball because of just the sheer amount of variables. So the way that they do it is that they look at how the score changes when you're on the court, and then they make several adjustments based off that. So based off that, all these different nerds, I guess, have their own methodology of filtering this data and trying to paint the most accurate picture that they can of what's going on. So a guy like Fred is like, for the last 2 seasons, he's been really high up there. Last year he was like top 20 in most of them. This year he's like top 5. So that doesn't mean Fred is a top 5 player, even though maybe I'd want him to be. It means in the role that the Raptors deploy him in, he's giving them like absurdly great impact. But what that means is when Fred's on the court, the team does really well. And when Fred's off the court, the team doesn't do so well. Why that is I don't know if there's like a perfect explanation, but if you were to ask me, my theory would be that he's like the only guard on the roster. Like it's not the most complicated reason, but it makes sense because a lot of what Fred does is just barren on this Raptors team. Like in terms of above average shooting, you have like 3 guys and like Fred, OG, Gary. That's about it. And then you have like Fred, who's able to do a high volume of shooting. Their spacing on the court. He's able to give them some ball handling, some high-end defense. Like you can see why the Raptors are just better with him on the court versus, when he's not on the court and whoever's playing the minutes would be. We had Svi, and Svi is a very interesting player, but he's usually not a good player. And this Delano, who's also a very interesting player, but I would also say not good right now. So it's a combination of Fred being very good and then the players that replace him being not very good.
Do you think there's a point to be made? And so when I think about this, the 2 things that come up to me are competition that you're playing a lot of your minutes against. If you look at like the discrepancy between DeMar and Kyle in catch-alls, a lot of it, is the gap between them as large as the catch-alls might say? No, but what contributes to that is, the Lowry plus bench lineups that killed teams and then threw DeMar's plus minus into like wacky world, right? It went crazy. And then you look at Fred, who now plays basically the whole game. You don't have to worry about competition. He's playing everybody because he's not leaving the floor. And he's
a menace.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so he's hugely impactful, and they win his minutes. And then you go look to when he was first popping off with the Raptors, and he was within the blogging community, like the net rating king. And so you're looking at a guy that once he's the star or, approximating like all-star status, he's winning huge minutes while playing like 40 minutes a game. And then you look at that same guy who, okay, when he came along and was playing like 23 minutes a game next to Kyle Lowry and plugging in, they were also winning his minutes by a huge amount. So this is a guy who just wins minutes. What would your biggest takeaway from that be? Would it be about Fred VanVleet? Would it be about defense being underrated? Would it be about bench units? What do you have?
It's probably like, this is a cop-out, but it's probably like all of that. Because firstly, it speaks to the value of Fred, but that doesn't mean that everybody who's underrated by advanced stats becomes a star. If you were looking at the stats like a couple of years ago, back when I forgot what it was called before this, but they had earlier iterations of what's now called Raptor on 538. They would always say, "Oh, Tyus Jones is the next all-star because he wins all his minutes." But as people can see, Tyus Jones is still a good player, but he's not an all-star. So it's not just that, oh, if they have good impact at a young age, when they grow, they'll become stars. But it's more like, you can look at it and say, okay, Tyus Jones wins his minutes. Why does Tyus Jones win his minutes? Why does Fred win his minutes? Is it because he's a great shooter? Is it because he's a great defender? Maybe it's both. You can look at who he replaces in the lineup. I know because Dwayne Casey usually liked to keep one of his better players coming off the bench just to have like a better bench. But that's why Patrick Patterson was the RPM god every year. Mm-hmm. Because he'd come and he'd replace like Luis Scola or like James Johnson, and then the Raptors would do a lot better with him there. So it's kind of like, you can't just look up the stats and be like, okay, this guy's the best player in the league. But you can look at the stats and say, okay, the stats are saying this guy is doing really well. Why is he doing really well? And then you go and then you watch the film, and then you're like, okay, this is why they're doing really well.
Well, that's like, you can see in like the articles I write, I put film in basically everything I write because I like to show and tell. And then if I really want to make something about Fred pop, you just put in like, by the way, this database ranks him as like the fourth most or third. I guess he's third now currently on like EPM. It's like, this database says he's the third most impactful player in the league. If you subscribe to that stuff, then like, hell yeah, that's an incredibly fun little nugget of information that you get to say, to other people who are into that kind of stuff, like, wow, he's third. Isn't that incredible? And to anybody else, it's not like taking up a whole part of the piece or anything like that, because the numbers don't tell anything unless you're going to go look up and into like the formula and see how everything is weighted, which hardly anybody does. Then the numbers are just boom, it's calculated, you get a number at the end. And so it is really interesting to see how that's like evaluated both in fan bases, and obviously neither of us know, but how much it's evaluated in front offices and stuff like that. Any parting shots for the Fred conversation? We'll talk about him during the rest of this podcast, but as far as the focus on him, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think for the numbers conversation, I would like to say that people probably overrate their own eye test a lot, which is why the numbers are important too. Which is why I don't think you can just ignore the numbers all the time. Or maybe it's not even overrating your eye test. Maybe what's most valuable in a game or in the current iteration of the NBA game right now is not what you think it is sometimes. So you could look at something like, 3-point shooters are more valuable than I thought if I look at this database. Is the data that I'm wrong, or is my conception of the value of 3-point shooting that's wrong? And I feel like that's also a question people don't ask enough. So yeah, the next time you're having an advanced analytics conversation, I'd like you to consider that as a human, you have flaws too.
Well, yeah, that's honestly the most important part is like, when we were talking about this at the top, you were saying, well, what do the numbers replace? They don't replace you watching the game, but they're supposed to capture things that you might miss passively watching a game. Like, for example, Blake did a piece, however many years ago, it came out on The Athletic, where he just watched James Harden for a game. And that's the piece he wrote. And the amount of stuff you can parse out and glean from just being that focused on one player is endless. And you can't do that for all 10 players on the court at one time. And so the impact is supposed to help capture the things that you passively miss. And yeah, you're absolutely correct. Everybody thinks they see everything on the court. And I think the smartest people typically know what they miss rather than seeing everything. It's like knowing your blind spots, what you could typically miss on a possession, so you know what to go back and look for. I think that's the key, is to know what you miss and then go back and try and see it. I don't know. What do you think about that?
That's a good way of putting it, I think.
Pascal Siakam, he's in the All-Star conversation, and deservedly so. He's been like incredible over the past month of basketball. He's been, ever since coming back from COVID, and, you know, probably for a week and a half, 2 weeks before that worth of games, he was great. And he's really entered like a new stratosphere as far as being able to manipulate defenses as a playmaker. And the touch that evaded him for, I don't know, like 50 games of basketball appears to be here again. And it makes him all the more dangerous around the bucket, and not just at the immediate 3 feet and in space, but get him out to like 13, 14 feet. That push shot can exist. And then you go a little bit beyond that. His mid-range has kind of dipped a little bit lately, but, you know, it's still in a decent spot, especially as a counter. And so the totality of his game on offense and defense is probably at a fever pitch currently. And that doesn't mean it can't go higher. It just means that this is the highest it's ever been. I'm curious what you think about his season so far.
I think, like I said before, he's been better than what I expected. I think maybe he's been playing like the game is kind of slowed down for him a little bit more this year in terms of just making his reads, less jump passing. He's not forcing, or at least to me, it doesn't look like he's forcing his scoring as much, where putting himself in bad spots. And yeah, I think the touch being back is the biggest thing, because it's been gone ever since, you know, the pandemic started, and, you know, that's understandable. But now that it's back, he's so much more dangerous around the basket. It's become a lot harder to guard him. And then defensively, he's not always locked in, I would say. But recently, he's been like probably our best defensive player, just in terms of, like, he'll miss like a rotation sometimes, but in terms of putting out the main fires that pop up in the Raptors defense, which is a lot of them this year. We can talk about that too. But is that Pascal's probably been the best one in terms of covering up for other people's mistakes.
Yeah, that is a really interesting wrinkle about his defense, is that he's probably, it's not absent-minded, but he's overlooking some of his own, I don't know, responsibilities as a weak side defender, so he can cheat to the strong side a lot of the time. He likes to hover in the periphery of the ball. That's something I notice when he plays defense, is that he wants to be near the ball. He wants to be able to make a play, or be able to kind of stonewall a drive in help, or rotate somewhere. And when the ball, like when you switch the play, to steal a term from footy, when you switch the play, sometimes he can be caught out a little bit, I've noticed. But overall, especially with a defense that deals in a lot of strong side and stuff like that, he's certainly very, very much involved. And the absent-minded plays, or something to that equivalent, have been fewer and far between as far as lately. But I absolutely agree. Like earlier on in the season, he did have like the missed rotations were kind of adding up as far as what we were seeing defensively, and the intensity wasn't always there. But along with the extra rebounding pop, so too has the defensive intensity on all spaces of the floor come together. So that's been really good. What do you make of he and Fred leading an offense together? That's, I think, a super funny wrinkle for the Raptors to be entertaining now, and the fact that they're hovering around, you know, a top 10 offensive rating.
I think it's great. They do a really good job just playing off of each other, which is because they've been playing together forever now. But with their strengths, they match well together, with Fred shooting and like general off-ball ability, and Pascal being such a threat in the paint, and being a really good passer now. I know inside the Raptors sphere that's been covered decently well, but I think maybe the national people don't know it yet. But Pascal's playmaking is really good. Ever since last year, I know you were pointing it out last year too, but this year it's been great, especially now, even if you look in the box score now, because his teammates are actually converting. But he rarely has a game now with like less than 3 or 4 assists. He's been having a lot of triple doubles lately. Like, Pascal has been doing a really good job just being a playmaker, and Fred does a great job playing off of that, and then they can play together. Like, you can have Pascal screening for Fred, you can have Fred screening for Pascal. Usually in the clutch, that's those are the actions that they'll go to, and and it works pretty well. I know the Raptors are actually a good clutch team the last time I checked their stats. So I think in terms of building an offense around those two, I would support that. It feels like they've been a top 10 offense this year. And we can talk about how that's kind of maybe cheating with how they've done it. But with Fred and Pascal on the floor, the offense has been good. Their team isn't winning these minutes by a lot, but that's because the defense has been bad. But I wouldn't say that's their fault.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get into the funky part then. You alluded to the defense a little bit earlier, and like we're kicking the can of the conversation down the road, but let's pick up the can now. So the defense, the offensive rebounding, the transition, everything that makes the Raptors funky, because Pascal is a very strong isolation player. He's a guy with athletic advantages that manipulates the defense and makes great passes. Fred is a super, super great on-ball guard who shoots the hell out of the ball and takes really good care of it and defends like hell. Those two players are not, although they have very unique career paths and still are unique players in the league, they are not what makes the Raptors funky. The Raptors are the number one offensive rebounding team in the NBA. They are the number one transition frequency team in the NBA. And they also happen to just never rebound the ball on their own end. And they rotate like hell and forego, one-on-one defense in lieu of saying, everybody rotate over, we're going to make passes. This team is funky. And what do you think about the direction that they've taken it this year?
I think it's super interesting. If you were on my Twitter, you would have seen me retweet a chart a couple of days ago. And I know our friend Kai hates graphs, but if you look at the graph, you'll see that the Raptors average 7 extra true shooting possessions, which is like field goal attempts and free throws, like combined. There's like a weight on the free throws. But okay, I'm not going to get into that. They average 7 extra shooting possessions a game, which is by a huge margin the most that any team has led the league in like the last 10 years or so, which is why the Raptors are winning usually, is they just get more possessions than the other team. And when Nick Nurse was first hired here, he said that was one of his coaching philosophy things. And I think this year they've like really gone after just winning the possession battle every game. And sometimes it's really funny. Like the last game they had against like the Blazers, they had like 6 offensive rebounds and they were down like 20. And it's like I feel like that's the definition of funky.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they both finished at 99 possessions at the end of that whole game. As crazy as that was, I think they finished even. But what you say about, it being Nick Nurse's philosophy, like get extra possessions because the team that has more possessions wins the game usually. He said prior to or at the very start of this season that he was looking to get around 5. And if they're winning on average like 7 and they're not winning every game, in fact, they're currently 500. What do you make of, and I've asked this to quite a few people who come on the podcast because I think it's the most interesting aspect of the Raptors season on a macro scale, is what do you think about them kind of forcing good analytics, but, losing other ones on the way there? Because a lot of teams, by proxy of the talent on the roster, find themselves in extra possessions. But the Raptors have taken maybe talent that wasn't best suited to do that, or maybe isn't best suited to play as many minutes as they do or have the same amount of responsibility as they do. And they've pursued these extra possession avenues to winning and dropped other things on the way. It's very interesting to me. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think it depends because there's a good argument here that the Raptors are still overperforming their talent level. And if that's true, which I don't know if we can say with certainty that it's true or not, but if it is true, then that means it's working, right? But if they're not overperforming on offense, I think you could say that they're overperforming. Nobody expected them to be a top 10 offense this year. But if they're still doing that and they're losing these games, maybe the players that they're playing to force that advantage are giving up too much elsewhere. I know it's not exactly the same, but I feel like forcing the analytics is a little interesting trend with NBA teams. Like if you remember Kenny Atkinson's Brooklyn Nets, they kind of forced the pretty little Morey ball shot chart where they'd only take shots at the three or the rim, and it wouldn't lead to a good offense. It would just be them forcing the analytics. So I feel like a lot of what it is you have to play to the strengths of the personnel you have, which I think the Raptors have done. I don't know if you can say that, oh, well, this team can play another way and do better. But the other side to that is that the Raptors very consciously built a team to pursue like this whole possession thing. And if that's the case, then I would not love them going all in on this style of roster building.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. Just to make it clear on like, if it's like a patchwork way of like making this year work, then it's fine. If it's like the goal of their team building, then I have questions.
Okay. Yeah. You and I are in the exact same position then. I agree with you. They're overperforming offensively, definitely. They're underperforming their defensive talent, but the grouping of that defensive talent, I think that they're about where they should be, considering the only avenue of defense that's available to them. So if this was Nick Nurse being given a team and they say, you play however you want, but these are the players we've signed, I would be super, super impressed. The fact that he's, come up with this idea, this is how they play. And this is really, there's a lot of ingenuity in it. But if this type of offense, this type of defense, this roster construction was created methodically, like this is the new wave of basketball, this is how we're going to play, then the same as you, I have significant questions about how well it could translate to the playoffs. A, how well it will last throughout the season, like the regular season. B, and the significant limitations of not having a center whatsoever. Like maybe some of the isolation possessions that are available to one of Siakam, Barnes, or OG now aren't there if they play a traditional center. But the passive defense you're allowed to have by playing a traditional center who can contest shots at the rim so that you don't have to force rotation, and you can also close out more possessions defensively with the rebounding, they've given up on that completely. And they realized this year that, okay, how do we get to a point where we can amalgamate some of that center production defensively? They said, okay, Precious, but Precious is maybe relative to the amount of minutes he plays, the worst offensive big man in the NBA currently. And that's not, he'll get better, obviously, but that's the reality of where we are right now. So it's super interesting to me.
Do you think that, I don't think they're against having a center. I think they just haven't been able to find a good one. Because I think we know at this point that they really wanted Evan Mobley, and now I think Mark Stein has reported that they've been sniffing after our old pal Jakob Poeltl. So maybe they're not out on the whole center thing, but they're looking for very specific centers, which maybe is hurting them in the short term.
Well, yeah, that's possible too. It's also like maybe they realized, they haven't gotten as many games as some people want to kind of tell how a team would play, but they've certainly gotten the minutes. These guys have played a lot of minutes at this style, and they've gotten really good players to test it out. Like the Raptors, their main guys are they're either good to very good NBA players. And so the feedback as far as, what does this do, this style of play, I think they've gotten a lot of it. And so maybe they're even saying, okay, we saw what this looked like. Now we know you cannot just cobble together a center by way of like Boucher, Siakam, and Precious and changing responsibilities on a possession to possession basis. And maybe they're saying, okay, now we look at Poeltl, now we look at whoever. And, I'm not sure if that's the case, because I'm sure they wouldn't decide in a half a season that, okay, our whole vision or whatever. But yeah, I do think there's something to be said that, maybe with them wanting Mobley, with them, the reported talks with Rashawn Holmes, whatever came of that, right? That
I'm still not over that.
Yeah, me too, brother. Me and you both, obviously. And but that's the thing, is like you're looking at this team and you say, did they plan not to have a center, or was it too ill fit, or was it too difficult with the cap to come together with an idea of what center to put there that works and what the cost would be? I think that's interesting Would you like Pirtle? Would that
I
be
think,
ideal?
yes, I think in terms of targets, he's probably the best or the most ideal fit, at least to what they're trying to do right now, because he does provide that defensive presence. You can even say elite, because Pirtle is a guy who's always like high up there in the defensive stats. It's like, oh, this is a legitimate all NBA caliber big man defender. And everyone like gives him his due, like, oh yeah, Pirtle's pretty good, but no one ever like, he doesn't really get that respect. But maybe the analytics are right, and he's this like hidden DPOY. And I think Pirtle's other strengths are like he's probably just like okay offensively in terms of like doing big man stuff. Like I know he can deal with like handoffs and stuff that other like not every big can do that. Like I know Bamba's a popular target, but he's a big who maybe the handoffs aren't there yet. And that's like a big part of the Raptors offense. And the other thing is that Pirtle's an elite offensive rebounder, which is, if that's what they're going to be pursuing, then I think bringing in Pirtle, a guy who can be low usage, a guy who gives them a defensive anchor, and a guy who lets them pursue the elite offensive rebounding thing further, it's a pretty good target.
Yeah, well, he's certainly, he fits in so many ways, and that's the best part about it, is a guy who does fit the ethos offensively a little bit and will give you more than Kem did offensively, and will give you more than Precious did defensively. That's exactly what the Raptors have been looking for, is a guy to kind of meld together what they've been stealing from both players, but never getting both from each of them. So I think that's the really interesting aspect of it. Goose, would you like to talk about some of the questions we've been asked on Twitter?
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds good. But before we do so, a quick note from Jack Health. So you want to get to the top of your game, Jack Health at www.jack.health is an online service for men's health that handles the doctor's appointment, getting the prescription, and shipping, which, by the way, is free. All you need to do is stay at home and relax. Sexual health, daily health, hair and skin, it's easy to book an appointment with any of their certified doctors. You don't need to tell everyone and their mother your issues, like when you go to the clinic, and mumble what you're there for. Do it all from the privacy of your own home through www.jack.health and boost your game to the best it can be. Okay, Goose. So here's the thing. I put out a little tweet saying that the Goose Man, the Birdman himself, was coming on the podcast, and wondered if the Goose Gaggle, the people who are fans of your work and your takes and your ideas on basketball, had any interesting questions. And so we have a lot of these that pertain to birds and bird anatomy, bird comps, and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to start with the basketball stuff. So from Abdel_Taco, what do you think of Scotty's pathway to becoming a higher volume pick and roll ball handler? He can keep guys on his hip and show some floater potential, but do you think he will find answers to guys going under or switching? Can he consistently beat centers on a switch with limited burst? I'm going to let you start that one off.
This is a really good question. And it's one of the reasons that people had a lot of questions with Scotty before their draft, is that functionally he's not an amazing athlete in like the traditional way of just being a high speed guy and like blowing by guys like that, like a LeBron James would. But I think this year he's shown a lot of promise as a ball handler. And the other thing is that they've tried putting centers on him, and I think it's worked, but he's also found ways of dealing with it. I don't know if you're going to have Scotty be like this James Harden type 20 pick and rolls a game type player, but like if they go under, then it gives him a runway, and if he gets stronger and like, the handle gets a little bit better, it gives him ways to like kind of force himself in the paint and like get off his little like touch shots and whatnot. And he's showing a little bit of his mid-range pull-up this year, which nobody thought he had. So I feel like, can he beat centers on a switch? Maybe not, but does he have to? Like that's my other thing with this, is that you don't have to like if Scotty is like running a pick and roll and they drop, and then if they go under on that, it gives either Scotty the space to like build up and drive right at the big, which I don't know if a lot of bigs can handle that, or it gives him space to like turn around and like he could even do like a handoff with Fred, and now Fred has space to get off a three, or they can run a pick and roll there. Like it doesn't have to be like this isolated thing, you know?
I think it would be really interesting to think of less pick and rolls, but just more handoff offense for Scotty, because pick and rolls can be quite stagnant in the way that they're starting. And that doesn't seem to be what delivers on a lot of Scotty's athletic promise. Scotty is really good at translating motion that's already there into more explosive motion. And his control with that, with his own body, I think is what's been most impressive to me this year. Not like the quick twitch first step to blow by guys, but the fact that he's moving side to side, he's constantly flipping his hips, and he's going wide and hop stepping around the paint in like isolations and stuff like that. And he's on balance, and his shot could go up at any time. His feet can be aligned anyway. His hips can be aligned anyway, but he'll flip his shoulders. He'll get square to put a shot up. And his touch, I think, has obviously been just incredible so far this year. So that's the unique aspect, I think, would be that instead of if you're looking for a screening play, you don't have to look strictly for pick and rolls for Scotty. And I don't think that plays into a lot of the advantages he has currently. Now, he could develop into counters and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Gary Trent Jr. has a couple more counters out of the pick and roll this year than he did last year and in Portland. And that's somewhat relative to how much he gets to run that play, but it's also what he's been comfortable with as far as getting his shot off and stuff like that. And so when we think about Scotty playing with a screen and advantage like that, I do like the handoffs a lot more than the pick and roll straight up. But when I was doing my pick and roll, when I was doing my big piece on Scotty and was watching, okay, what does a pick and roll create? A lot of times I think there's like this idea of pick and roll defense in the playoffs versus the regular season. DeMar DeRozan basically gamed regular season pick and rolls to be one of the best pick and roll players in the NBA during the regular season, but it did not translate to the playoffs. And I think Scotty's current skill set is one that you could see dominate a lot of the ho-hum pick and roll defense during the regular season, but might struggle in the playoffs. And the only way he'll counter that, I think, is with a confident and potent pull-up jumper. That's what remains to be seen. But given his physicality, his fearlessness for contact and stuff like that, I think the second quarter, third quarter pick and rolls that he'll no doubt get during the forthcoming seasons and stuff like that, I think he'll actually score quite well on them. But in the playoffs, in a more heated environment and stuff like that, I think that handoffs will be more fruitful. Any thoughts on that, Goose?
Well, first of all, people should check out the piece that Samson did on Raptors Republic. It's been highly lauded. Some say piece of the decade, maybe.
Whatever.
So, if you have Scotty questions, that's the first thing I would check out. But on top of that, yeah, I think a lot of what teams do is that they just have base pick and roll coverage for the regular season. Like most teams will just go over on everything just to like promote trying hard, because if you hear coaches talk about it, they'll be like, yeah, if we let them go under in the regular season, they get lazy with it. So we make them go over. It keeps them engaged, which is why you'll see them going over on even like guys like Russ or Ben Simmons in the regular season. But then in the playoffs, they'll go under, and that presents new issues. Like it'll force a pull-up sometimes. It'll force the pull-ups a lot. Sometimes the pick and roll player, if they're like a great athlete like Russ, it doesn't really matter if they go under because Russ will still blow by, but Scotty's not that. But I think Scotty being as versatile as he is, I don't think we need to think of him in this like heliocentric star type of context.
Right.
Because it's great that he can run pick and rolls, but if he's not able to produce a good advantage there's no reason to force it, because now he's capable of switching to his other options as like a handoff guy or like a roll man, or maybe you have a switch and you can like pass the ball and he finds somebody else, and so I don't think that Scotty's going to become this like LeBron James type player, but he's going to be a really good player, and pick and rolls will be part of it. I just don't think it'll be his like bread and butter.
I actually think the best way to get Scotty into advantageous positions in the pick and roll is to get him like a really, really good roll man with a huge catch radius for lobs, because then Scotty can start to leverage that pass into different avenues for driving lanes for himself. And I think that would also mean that teams would be more eager to switch in a playoff scheme if they're playing defense, like in the pick and roll. If there's a guy with a lot of roll gravity who's a really good finisher, and you have Scotty Barnes who's really tall and he's a great passer, then you're looking at a guy who, like, lobs can be more direct. They don't have to spend as much time in air. And so that connection would be really, really tough to tag. And those types of lobs, considering the height to height and like how direct a line he can throw, would be really tough to break up. That would create a lot of switch opportunities, I think, or driving lanes for Scotty. And I do really trust Scotty to become one of the better isolation players in the NBA. And I do trust him to score against centers. He had a really great game against Domantas Sabonis earlier this year. And Domantas isn't everything. I mean, OG basically built his whole, I could be a shot creator, I could be most improved player of the year, on that one game where he just every possession made Domantas Sabonis look like he had, cement in his feet, which, some players do, some players don't. But Scotty, I do trust in him to be able to score on bigs. He's very resourceful, and he's fundamentally a guy who just will get to the rim with he's got chutzpah, man. He's got moxie, and
a muscular frog, as some put it.
Yeah, exactly. The most muscular frog you've ever seen. So I think a really good roller would be the most helpful thing. And then obviously, just like anybody else, if you hit a pull-up jumper, it fundamentally changes how teams are going to play you. And you get driving lanes. Like Victor Oladipo's big year that he had in Indiana, you can draw a direct line to why he started shooting good at the rim and defenders jumping out on his three-pointer. Like that's there for a reason. So yeah, that's a great question, by the way, Abdel. That's a really, really good question. Next one from our dear buddy, James Boo. Okay, so here's the thing. The name on Twitter is @FreeMalikMonk, and James has written in a two-parter. Okay. Does Goose admit defeat on Siakam? Also, would like some discussion on Fox, maybe Markelle's fit in Toronto, since I know both of you are fans of them, the upside and downside, and how they work, especially if you add a starting center on top of that. Maybe better than that, a philosophy question that sort of applies to both the Raptors and Cavs. To what extent can you neglect threes and still be a strong NBA offense? Do you need threes at all? Okay, I'll let you pick where you want to start with that, Goose, and then we'll kind of piecemeal our way through it.
All right. In classic James Boo fashion, this is a lot. So,
yeah.
All right. We already talked about Siakam, so I don't know if do I admit defeat? No, I'd still trade him for the right thing. It's just the thing. The thing is more valuable now. But we can talk about Fox.
Oh, actually, okay. Let me cut in quick. Basically, for the people who don't know, who didn't listen to our episode this summer, we had one where we talked about, should Pascal be traded? Especially, everybody who's a Raptors fan knew what was happening with Pascal. There was a lot of murmurs. All the insiders were saying that he could be traded, all that kind of stuff. And Goose and I had a debate on what the Raptors should do. I took the position of don't trade Pascal, and he took the position of trade Pascal. And it wasn't like he's like, oh, I don't like Pascal, I think he's bad. It's just we both took a side. And so obviously you leaned more that way than I did, but the conversation was mostly just us talking about Pascal. It wasn't like a first take style, shootout between the two of us where we get to yell back and forth. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. So as far as Pascal goes, that's I think if you're talking about trading him, the one thing that's changed since we had that conversation is just Scotty and how good he's been. So Scotty has been really good. I think for a rookie, he's been pretty special, even in a special class. And if he continues this trajectory, and maybe by year 3, you have maybe an all-star, I think keeping Pascal makes a lot of sense there. Because usually with good players in the NBA, it's hard to upgrade. Usually you downgrade. And so if Scotty's going to be this rookie contract star, it makes a lot of sense to keep the good players. And then now maybe you can make a deep playoff push sometime on their rookie contract. And which kind of gives the Raptors a lot of breathing room when it comes to trading guys like Pascal or Fred, which is Scotty being this guy who injects upside into the team.
Definitely. I think that's right on point. That's the thing. It's like, if you really do want to win with Scotty and you think like, okay, we want to maximize his whole time in Toronto, his whole contract, can you get a guy better than Siakam in-house? What is the avenue to that? That makes no sense to me. I don't think they could. And then if you're trying to bottom out, then you're also maybe, what if Scotty becomes really, really good, really fast? Then you're saddling a star with rookies who are definitely not as good as one of OG, Fred, or Pascal if they do move away from them. So yeah, point well made, Goose, for sure. But okay, let's do Fox.
Fox is one of my favorite players. He's been getting a lot of disrespect lately for a tumultuous season in Sacramento, but I'm still very pro get Fox on my team while we can, because Fox has one of the most rare skills in the NBA. It's just like we were just talking about with Scotty, which is what happens when you can't blow by someone. There's not a lot of players that Fox can't blow by, and that just forces a lot of natural advantage for a team. Like, Fox is like top 5 in shots taken in the paint, and he's like a really good finisher. I don't know if he's top 5. Don't quote me on that. he's really high.
Not this year.
Not this year. Yeah, last year he had a really, really great season in terms of rim shots. Shots at shots at the rim. So that's, I think, is one of the most valuable skills you can have as an NBA player, is just being able to get to the rim whenever you want. And that forces a lot of advantages to a team. Fox is not maybe the best passer, but I think he's still a pretty good one. And if you pair him with guys like Fred and OG and Scotty, you have a strong half court advantage there, which is Fox just being able to collapse the defense whenever, and then being able to build either like, you get spot ups off that. You get people attacking closeout. Like, OG attacking closeout is much more dangerous than OG trying to create from a standstill, or like even like post up. And I think the biggest detractor that you see from Fox is his defense, because it's admittedly stinky. It's stinky because he just kind of doesn't try. And maybe that's like a Sacramento thing, or like what Rudy Gay called it, basketball hell. So maybe if you rescue him, maybe he'll start trying again. And when he did try earlier in his career, he was actually pretty good. He had good technique getting over screens and just kind of being like passing lanes, and like there's a chance we can like Gary Trent him, That's my take on Fox.
That's what you bring up, right? Is like he's not top 5, by the way, like this year, but he's, as far as a guard, and especially a lead guard, his rim pressure is something you don't see at the end. Like, it doesn't come along very often. It's not the Ja Morant level, like where Ja is right now. It's like Ja is getting a step and he's getting 2 feet in the paint anytime he wants in every NBA possession. And it's just a wonder to watch him work. Fox, as far as, he's toned it down a little bit and he's a cut below that as far as volume, but he is, as he's always been, like around either the 75th to 90th percentile as far as guards who finish at the rim. And considering his volume, that's just immensely valuable. And, this is something, having talked with PD so much, and, when you talk about guys who scout players at the NBA or college level, they always ask, what's easy? What can this player do that doesn't require an incredible feat of talent or strength or something like that? What are the avenues that's always available to this player? And that first step, and Fox's athleticism and just burst towards the rim, means that a lot of advantages that you see Raptors players work like hell to create, he gets in an instant. And that's definitely the sell, is like, as you say, can you Gary Trent him defensively? Can you get him to buy in? And can you revitalize this aspect of an offense that's been gone since, Kawhi, and then before that, like 2015-16 Kyle Lowry, a guy who just, boom, is in the paint all the time, and not methodically, like quick as a rabbit gets in there, or quick as a fox, let's say. Quick
as a raptor.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Fox, I think, is really, really interesting. I don't have a trade framework that I have, in mind or anything like that. Pascal is obviously, considering OG's skill set, Scotty's the young star, and then Fred, and Fred just having like the, borderline all NBA year that he's having, and not borderline to some. But I guess Pascal is probably, if I were to ask you, how are you getting Fox? I'm guessing that's the guy you're putting out on the other side.
It's the one that would make the most sense, I think.
You're not giving Boucher in a first.
Well, if they're taking it, then sure.
That's all the Sacramento Kings fans and writers who we know are just shaking their fists at the Boucher joke, but them's the breaks. Somebody who's probably like a more realistic get without trading one of the core players, Markelle Fultz. And so Markelle is somebody that we are both enamored with. Yeah, big time hooper. The only hooper who does not have like a nice jump shot maybe ever. Which kind of funny. Like nobody calls Kyle Anderson a hooper, by the way. But so anyway, yeah, Markelle Fultz has been in Orlando for some time now, is one of the most interesting players in the NBA. His highlight package, his season at Washington actually is one of the best things you could ever watch. He looked like one of the most dominant players to ever come into the NBA. He just looked incredible. And then everything that happened with his jump shot, obviously that went sideways, the shoulder stuff. Yep. And then the torn ACL, he's now coming back into the fold and will likely embody a lot of the herky-jerky and incredible decision-making stuff that boosts his game, but he doesn't provide pop in a lot of ways that, other guards would. I'm curious, and James Boo is as well, what you think of his fit in Toronto.
I'd love to see him in Toronto, but I think his fit is probably not great because unlike Fox, he's not like that dominant in terms of just always getting into the paint, always creating an advantage. He'll have his moments for sure, and he's a pretty good pick and roll player. So maybe like when Fred's off the floor, you have somebody out there who can run the offense a bit. But in terms of just the shooting, it's pretty hard to get over. Because right now the Raptors are already being zone defense to death, and I don't know if Markelle, as good as he is, could overcome that. He is. I can't say enough good things about him, but like I feel like this is not the team for him to grow more at.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to think about his game, right? As you say, like definitely he's an above average pick and roll decision maker and passer for sure. Like that's the thing is he makes great decisions and finds winning decisions, but who is his partner to run that with on the Raptors? And if it's Chris Boucher, who's spacing the floor? And if you look at who's spacing the floor, would you rather those people be on ball? That's the question. Markelle Fultz next to a bench, like let's say they run a bench lineup and it's Pascal, Markelle, Precious, Boucher, and like Justin Champagny or something like that. Is a pick and roll going to work because of how much teams are going to be able to dig in one pass away and not pay for it? Probably not. It's going to be a really, really difficult context for Markelle to fit in. I would love to see him get a shot with a team that has like, a decent amount of spacing and has like, kind of a silver bullet of a roll big, and just to see him kind of get back into the swing of things, being able to throw passes and stuff and maybe turn the corner because of the roll gravity and his own athleticism. He's like his length. He's a great finisher too. So I think that's probably ideal for Markelle. And I don't want the Raptors to have Markelle just to have Markelle. I want Markelle to pursue and be allowed the best team for him.
Markelle.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, the Markelle
Raptors
stuff
are like really confident about their jumper development. They're like, oh yeah, we can fix them right up.
Yeah, it's certainly like, I guess it's Norm, Fred to some degree, but Fred was really, really cold coming into the NBA, but he's been a shooter, like not to this degree, obviously. And, they famously kind of walked away from Fred's jumper and said, we don't want to tweak that really, because it's already so funky, and like the side spin that he puts on it, you start to tweak, things could get really hairy really fast. But I think and OG started shooting as soon as he came into the NBA. Like I think he was 38% his rookie year.
Yeah.
So was that done prior to the season? Like did the Raptors fix his jumper in 14 days of training camp or something like that? Who knows really? Yeah, but the jumper stuff I think is an interesting conversation. Once the Raptors have coaches who are retired or who want to put the recipes out into the world, I wonder what that'll look like. But especially like development guys, right? Otherwise,
could you say that Pascal's mid-range development is a feather in their cap?
I think it's a feather in his cap, obviously. But yeah, it's really interesting. Is this because Nick Nurse has his shooting, he has his little program, and he has
a 12-step program.
Yeah, exactly. He has he has his program, and then just because like Raptors players have shot well, they don't anymore, but they have in the past. There's kind of this idea that the Raptors, especially around the championship, right? Like there was this high that the Raptors could just take anybody's jump shot and just make it immediately good. And, especially when you take in the context of like, what did they do pre-draft and where did these players come from? And then you look at Pascal, basically, he shoots much better, but is that a normal progression for an NBA player? And especially a guy who has obviously like the potential bandwidth that Pascal does. Like he hasn't just improved as a shooter. He's just a guy who is able to improve a lot at everything. Like that's Pascal Siakam's whole deal. So are these players who have the potential to develop that stuff most places they go? And are the Raptors doing a great job of scouting that? Or is this just that the Raptors are able to put anybody into the gym, Goose or myself, and we come out as like a bona fide NBA shooter? I think that's a really interesting conversation, but I don't think they would solve Markelle. I think that would be like maybe hubristic, but okay. We'll move on to the next part of it. And so let's do the basketball philosophy thing. So Raptors and Cavs, the Raptors obviously playing small, the Cavs playing big, the two towers in Mobley, Jared Allen.
Sometimes three.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes three with Lowry. And you look at the way they play the game, they play it huge. And there have been some teams that have gone jumbo, the Raptors being one of them on the way to the championship. And the Raptors are jumbo in some respects this year while also being small. Do you have any basketball philosophy takes in regards to those guys?
Well, I think when James asked do you need the threes for a strong offense? I feel like you need like a baseline of threes, but I don't think you have to be like this elite shooting team. Although obviously shooting always helps. Like, and if you look at any fan base that was like, oh, we just need more shooting at the deadline. So there's always like, oh, we could use more shooting. But I feel like the interesting question now at this point in the NBA is that who is taking the threes? Because before this year, the Bucks and the Raptors were some of the teams to go like, you know what? There's a lot of mediocre shooters shooting threes. Let's just let them. And the Bucks didn't let them shoot in the corner like the Raptors do. But it's kind of the same philosophy where sometimes a three is not the best thing that you can get. Like if we look at the teams that shoot the most threes in the league right now, I think the Jazz are number one, and they're also the number one offense. So you can't say that the threes don't matter. But if you look at number two, it's the Timberwolves, and they're a below average offense. So you're like, okay, well, it's not like a 1-1 correlation causation here. It's just shoot more threes isn't a catch-all. You should play more to what you have. And I think the Raptors and the Cavs have done a good job of that. But it also results in their offense being like ugly sometimes because they don't have the same ceiling that these shooting teams do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Raptors basically are a great team for this, right? Is that the Raptors have played a lot of extreme basketball the past few years. When you look at Kyle Lowry's last year with the Raptors, or the last 2 years, let's say, because the 2019-20 season, where the Raptors had the most ideal mix of rim and three-pointers, basically achieving Morey ball because, it's funny, Daryl Morey traded away Kyle Lowry, and Kyle Lowry was the point guard he was searching for every single year in Houston. That was going to, obviously Chris Paul, that Houston team, they should have won the championship. That team is one of the greatest teams of all time to me. Not everybody has to agree, but they created something truly special that year. And But a lot of other years, you look at like when Russ came in or prior to that, Kyle Lowry would have been the exact guy to play out Daryl Morey's offensive ethos as far as decision making and the types of shots he can create for teammates. And the Raptors, they went from being the team that played the most ideal version of basketball by the analytics. And then they went to being this, which is just, it is analytics, but in the dirtiest, grossest way possible. Like you're throwing stuff at the rim and then you're throwing 4 bodies at it. And you're seeing what comes out and you're trying to get these extra possessions and maybe some putbacks, maybe some relocation threes and all that kind of stuff. And then on the opposite side, you have a defense that will allow the corner 3 because they want players to be passing up court if they're going to turn it over, which means that transition points are easier that way. Like that's an extremely funny wrinkle to think about, but it's something that the Raptors thought of like, okay, well, they'll have to pass up court. If we steal the ball, it's more guaranteed points rather than, vice versa and stuff like that. So that is really interesting. But as far as no threes, I do think threes are maybe a little bit over fetishized, but as far as not needing threes at all, I think that would be like classic, like James Boo jumping the shark. But I obviously, James, I don't think you actually believe that, but I know you like to frame things in like the most extreme terms. So, I think you're onto something as far as like our threes maybe thought of as more important than they are, perhaps. But as far as like, do we need them at all? I think everybody knows the answer to that. Threes are good. They're pretty good. There's a reason people shoot them, and some people are good at it.
Maybe the best way to frame it is that threes are good, but they're not necessary. Perhaps like after a certain point, right? Because like obviously there's like a baseline somewhere. We're like, okay, we can't have this bad shooting, or else like it's not 1990.
Okay, so we have I think like 2 basketball conversations left, and then Bird stuff. So Bird, HJ the 4. Can you please address the idea of small ball? Is there any real life examples of it being successful or leading to a championship outside of, let's say, a team with Curry, KD, Clay, and one of the best defensive players ever in Green? Okay. And then I'll add like an addendum onto that, a second tweet. Find myself consistently frustrated with other fans who seem to think that rim protection, defensive rebounding, interior defense, screening and rolling, and other skills traditionally associated with the 5 spot are unimportant in the modern NBA. Not asking for Roy Hibbert. Okay, so I'll take the lead on this one because this is stuff I've written about. It was kind of funny. Lewis and I, we did an episode of Minute Basketball, which was called State of the Big. And it came out the very same day that Jonathan Tjarks wrote like this huge piece on how small ball was the way forward. And obviously everybody could see in the playoff games and, how teams have kind of shaken out since then. Big men are way more important than small ball. I think that, and also as far as like, are some Raptors fans absolutely underrating rim protection, defensive rebounding, interior defense, and those types of things traditionally given like to be associated with the 5 spot? Absolutely they are. But you're fans, you know what I mean? And not in like a pejorative type of way, but like if the fans are told, this is the team, this is what we're building. Masai, the same guy who built, a championship roster, and Bobby Webster, the guys who pulled off the Kawhi Leonard heist, those same guys are telling you we're playing without a center. Why not believe them and say what they believe is correct? This funky defense is correct. This funky style is correct. But as far as trends I notice league-wide and what I find works, I think the Raptors, their team construction is untenable. And I don't think this team will ever reach its full peak for those players on it until they have a quality 5 on the team. I think that's a very, very clear missing piece here. So that's kind of how I feel about it. And as far as small ball, there was one team that did it, and they just happened to have 4 Hall of Famers, and 2 of those Hall of Famers will have top 10 of all time player acclaim, whether they are there or whether they're just in the periphery. They're there. And so, I don't think small ball is tenable. I think it's something you can do in short spurts. I think it's cool to be an adaptable team, but I don't believe in small ball as a theory on basketball. I still believe that bigs are important.
Small ball is so 2017. The basketball world has moved on, I think. And I think the Raptors have too. I really do think that their big situation is more like just them not being able to find somebody versus them
It
like
could be, yeah.
punting. Yeah. But the other thing with that is that they punted on Rashawn, and like if we're talking about how important big man play is, I think Rashawn is kind of like the perfect way to frame that discussion. Because I really think if we had Rashawn this year, the Raptors would probably be like a top 5 team in the East. Like what he does on offense is so important. We've already really talked about kind of how important it is to have like a roller, and Rashawn is probably one of the best in the league in that regard, in terms of just opening up lanes, in terms of opening up extra reads, just having a guy to worry about lobs, forcing teams to tag from the corner. It's kind of like it just opens up a lot for your offense. And then obviously you have defense. He's very good. I know people would look at the Kings and be like, how can that guy be good? But a lot of that is because of just the context in Sacramento, where it's just really bad for a player like Rashawn on defense.
Yeah, definitely. It's Rashawn is definitely the guy you and I are obviously super high on. I have people who eye roll at me about Rashawn because I've been, I don't know, what is it, like 2.5 years now that I've been saying I want Rashawn on the Raptors. And like
there's dozens of us.
Dozens. And so obviously we're really big fans of, but HJ the 4, I think like you gave us an opportunity to discuss something that I think is almost definitive right now. And certainly I do see the way that some Raptors fans do have conversations about like the center position. And yeah, some people are lower on the center position than they should be, or than I think they should be, as far as what I think works in basketball at the NBA level right now. And so I think that's a really great question. And so as far as just like addressing the idea of small ball, I think it is a factor in some teams' roster construction, and they can have some lineups that work. But I don't think that it should be the core thing that you build with, because only one team has ever done it. And I don't think the small aspect was actually what made that team go. I think it was actually the outlier talent and performance at every goddamn position. Okay. Sorry, you have any more?
If I wanted to say that if you don't think the centers are important, I want you to watch a pick and roll with Precious as the roll man. And then go to like any other team and watch like what happens when JV is the roll man, and how different an offense looks.
Yeah, man. Or like even just go to the opening minutes of the Raptors Wizards game, and then look at the Daniel Gafford possessions, and then they stopped playing Gafford and they went a little bit smaller because they want to get like Rui and Denny and Davis minutes, and the Raptors just absolutely smashed the hell out of them, because it fundamentally changes the way you're able to drive and manipulate from the middle of the floor. So yeah, interesting thing, of course. Really good question. Okay, from the Dunker Spot podcast, which is hosted by, from Josh Codanera at Josh Scoutum, quote, from the Dunker Spot pod, Boucher or Bamba, end quote. And so the Dunker Spot podcast is a league-wide podcast hosted by Steve Jones Jr. and Nikias Duncan. Yeah, many people love it, critically acclaimed. Well done, fellas. Keep talking hoops. But okay, Boucher or Bamba. Do you have any leanings there? Let's do potential and let's do current, and then let's talk about it.
Currently, I think Chris is better. I don't.
Hell yeah, dog.
I don't think you can really argue for Bamba. Maybe if you want to just get into like, okay, well, having a primary rim protector would be so impactful that we can kind of overlook everything else with Mo. But if you don't believe that, then I don't think you can say that Mo is better right now.
Okay, and the ceiling play then?
The ceiling play, I think, is interesting. I feel like Chris is probably already near his ceiling. He's not like the youngest player, and I don't know if there's like a lot of growth opportunity in terms of just adding new things or like more impactful things to his game versus just being more polished and like reliable, which I think he's done a good job over the last like probably over a month now. It's just being like this good bench presence. But in terms of potential, I think you could probably sell me on Mo eventually becoming a starter. But a lot of it is just figuring out his offense. And I don't know if you can have Bamba and Precious on the same team in terms of two players just trying to figure out how to play offense at the NBA level. So I don't know. I feel like if they do trade for Bamba, it's fine. But if the goal is to win as many games as possible right now, that's probably not what you want to do.
Okay, yeah, we're in the exact same boat then. If you are punting on this year, then yeah, let Chris go get paid somewhere else this summer, because if he keeps playing this well, then he will. And Mo Bamba, obviously, if you want to have a guy in-house work on his development, Mo Bamba has several outlier skills for his size, and the size being an outlier, size isn't a skill, but it's a pretty big deal. And so I think there's a case to be made for that. But as far as winning games this year, and I'm of the mind that the Raptors should be trying to win games this year, even looking at something maybe moving up and making the team better at the deadline. You can quibble about what they would give up in a trade, but I think that's something to look at. I think Chris Boucher has been a huge part of every single game that the Raptors have won or been close in. And I think that he has played the role almost perfectly of a guy who fills lanes offensively. His rotations on defense, I don't know if you've been seeing this too, Goose, but I find that they're actually way, way crisper than they were earlier in the season. And his weak side rim protection has been a factor as well. So I think this has been his strongest defensive stretch of his career. I think he's been a positive probably for the first time in his career. And offensively, filling the lane, being able to finish around the bucket, and then the three-point shot coming around, he's just been an immensely valuable bench big for coming up on 2 months now. At the very start of February, it'll be 2 months of really, really strong basketball off the bench. Should he be starting games? No, but he's just been invaluable as a bench big. So, and as far as Mo Bamba, I think you've probably watched more Mo than I have as far as, speaking to the ceiling or the potential. So I think that's a good place to leave it unless you have any more thoughts.
I guess Chris doesn't have a really cool rap song. if that's your tiebreaker, then I get it.
Okay. Yeah. That's true. It's important to consider these things. It's like what are the social media branding opportunities that happen if Mo Bamba comes through? What is Drake gonna do, right? Obviously, he won't vote for the All-Star game, but maybe there's work to be done. Okay, last basketball question before we get into the bird/basketball stuff from Josh D at Mr. Banana Slam. Great at Josh. Quote, what ideal role player would the Raptors need to help complement their young core in the future? Okay, end quote. Goose, who do you have in mind for that? An ideal role player.
Who are we considering the core? Is Fred and Pascal part of that?
Young core. Let's leave Fred and Pascal out of it then.
Okay, so if we're just looking at Scotty and OG, and I guess Gary.
Malachi, of course.
Oh, yeah. Malachi still exists. Yeah. It'd have to be a big, right? Like, this pod has been like the get a big man pod, but I feel like that's the easy answer here. Is just like a guy who can do what Richaun Holmes does.
Are there any young bigs that you like in particular? Like, Gafford is not young, but Gafford I think is a really interesting big if the Wizards are going to keep playing him only 11 minutes a game. You know what I mean? Like, is there a younger big?
I would love Gafford on this team, but I don't think he can be traded this year. He's like poison pilled. So, one of my favorite. Yeah. Because he signed that extension. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very good point. Well, Goose, I have really bad news for you and the viewers. Me openly pleading for the Raptors to get Daniel Gafford after the Wizards game. Do not adhere. Don't listen to my advice. Okay. Anyway.
But one of my favorite young bigs is Naz Reid, who our friend James has said is better than Cat, but I don't know. I don't know if we can agree on that, but we can say that he's definitely one of the most skilled bigs in the league already. And he's like 22. So that's a guy, he's wonderfully funky. And I feel like he'd be a good fit on the Raptors just because like he's just a hooper, man. He's like post ups, face ups, handoffs. He's got little Euro steps, little dunks, little threes. He's got it all.
Yeah,
like,
Nas. Yeah, we have a meme for that. I don't know if you remember, but they don't know that I love Nas Reed. The meme.
Yeah, they don't know how much I love Nas Reed. The only thing that he doesn't have that I feel like the Raptors could use is being like this alley-oop threat, where he's kind of like,
yeah, he's more ground bound.
Yeah, he's kind of like short and not that bouncy, but I feel like everything else he does would fit the team well. It already fits Minnesota well, and like on defense, at least Minnesota and Toronto are pretty similar. So I feel like in terms of translation, it'd be pretty clean. And you're looking at like a really good offensive fit. So that's a guy I would definitely sniff around. But yeah, I just love Nas Reed.
I think he would be. There's a couple guys that I know you and I like that the Raptors missed the opportunity or weren't able to leverage, into an opportunity or something like that, right? There's quite a few guys in the league who it seemed like could have been had or weren't being used very often. And now
we had Malik Monk last year.
Yeah, right. Totally. Or Maxey even, right? It's like these guys who maybe were sitting on the precipice of being sent elsewhere because they weren't being used properly. Suddenly, just because of circumstances on their team, they grew into a role or another team already scooped them up. There's quite a few guys who've switched either roles or locations that, maybe the Raptors, they could have been really helpful. And Nas seems to have a spot on that Timberwolves team. Especially once James is running things over there, I think he'll have a very featured role as far as what he does. Okay, this one, a personal one from our dear friend, Scotty Barnes, Caribbean Grill, at pakhattak. So here we go. Quote, what's the biggest lessons you learned from evaluating this draft class from their college tape and how it is ultimately played out thus far? End quote. So this is for you. I don't evaluate the draft. I just... I mooch off of guys like you around draft time to teach me things.
I feel like the biggest thing would be that maybe we overvalue college basketball in terms of how much it tells us about players. Like I think with Scotty, that might have been what happened in terms of he had to come off the bench and he had to be like more of a playmaker, and he played on a team that didn't really get him too many scoring opportunities, or maybe didn't let him show off his skills as much. And I think the bigger one there would be Franz Wagner. I don't know if people don't really watch the Magic too much, but if you ever get a chance and you watch Franz, he's been really impressive for a rookie, especially his ability to be like this driver, which he didn't show at all in college really, but he had it in high school. And the thing there is that, all right, maybe we shouldn't just look at what the newest sample is. Maybe we should go back and see what they did before. Even have like the Magic are a good one. You can even look at like Cole Anthony and see like, oh, well, he's been hooping for most of this year and he was terrible in college. So maybe we should expand on what we look at before the draft, to not just what the most recent stuff is.
It's kind of funny. You're absolutely correct, but nobody's going to accept that in regular media because it means that they would have to start uplifting the dudes who watch high school basketball, and they do not want to bring those scouts into like the conversation. I don't think, which is too bad because those guys put so much work in, right? But there's very much, they like the guys who go to college games, watch their 240 college games or whatever, and then get their takeaways and that kind of stuff. And if you ask more, those guys can't start watching high school games or don't really want to. And then you have to start going to like people who actually watch the high school games for their opinion. And I don't think the media like wants to stretch in that way, which is too bad. But I think that's the reality of it.
Scouting is hard, man. It's a lot of bad basketball to get through too. It takes a certain amount of basketball love and willpower to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, we're getting into the funner questions, I guess. Well, actually, this has just been a blast regardless. But okay, getting into the bird stuff. Okay, so from Freddie Rivas, which Raptor would you most like to go birding with? Goose.
What are we saying birding is, like bird watching?
Yeah, birding is bird watching, I believe. And you know why I know that? Because of that story of that lady who lied about the dude who was birding in Central Park, and he was a black man who was birding, and she was the white woman, and that was the racial tension stories were really selling. I don't know if you remember that, but that was how I remember what birding is, because that was the first time I saw it used. And he's like, I was birding. I was like, what the hell is birding? And he's just watching birds, just a sweet man watching birds. So who do you want to watch birds with?
That was a Slumdog Millionaire callback there. Guys I would want to watch birds with. I feel like Scotty is probably up there. I feel like he'd be really excited about the whole thing. Maybe Delano. Delano seems like a really fun guy to be around. What about, or maybe OG? Because I feel like OG would just be like a guy who randomly knows way too much about birds and just refuses to explain at all.
Yeah, he definitely would have a bit where he knew a lot about any type of, like, what are they called? Like, there's a type of bird called the booby or something like that.
Yeah.
And like, that's one of his niche bits that fits into the most interesting man in the world umbrella that he has going. I think OG would be my selection.
Definitely OG.
Right. Okay. From our dear friend Kai, referenced earlier in this podcast, the man who hates graphs, also has been heard on this podcast a couple weeks ago. Quote, is his favorite animal even a bird? Or is he like a dog/cat loving fraud? End quote. Goose, allegations. What's up?
Is it being a fraud to love more than one thing? Don't
told his girlfriend.
Okay, you know what? Yeah, my favorite animal. I don't know if I have a favorite. Yeah, sure. Let's go with a bird. Nobody would go on the internet and lie. So
what bird?
Well, he got me. I used to have pet in Pakistan. You know, I lived in Pakistan for a bit. So we used to have, like, there used to be a guy on the street, and he would just sell these like dyed little chicks, like chicken babies. So you could just go up and buy like a couple of chicken babies to just play with, and they wouldn't live very long, but it was probably like the only pet I've ever had, of these like little colorful little chicken babies.
Oh wow! So
yeah.
They're like, you'd witness their life cycle repeatedly. Like, these birds come into your life, you're like, hell yeah, and then they die.
Bro, they would, but usually it was just stray cats would come and eat them.
Oh damn!
The biggest thing, yeah.
So are cats? Are you a cat or dog guy?
I don't like cats now for obvious reasons.
It helps shape you.
Yeah.
I see what it is. I think birds and cats are also diametrically opposed. I think they're villains in each other's world. So I think that also tracks as far as the lore of Hoop Goose.
Exactly.
Okay. No cats. Okay. Next one from Alexander McDonald. Quote, how can he justify his lust for De'Aaron Fox given what we know? End quote. And so what we have here is a Google search of, do foxes eat geese? And then we're seeing, the returns are that foxes do eat geese. Do you have any response for that?
Well, Alexander, they say that danger is sexy. So.
Okay. From Daniel Sherman, quote, are birds real? And why is the answer no? End quote. This obviously linked to the incredible and wonderful conspiracy theory that birds aren't real. They are just surveillance machines that the government uses. Do you subscribe to that as a bird yourself?
I'm not legally allowed to discuss that.
Oh, okay, yeah. You have an NDA.
I'm not allowed to discuss birds being not allowed to discuss birds. Okay. The reality of robot birds.
Okay, and then maybe the most interesting, depending on how we answer it, from Sean Woodley, quote, what bird best embodies each member of the Raptors starting five? End quote.
All right, yeah, you wanna split it up? So
okay, well, let's decide who the starting five is then, because they've had a lot of them this year. Who's your starting five? Because I remember prior to the season, I chose Goran Dragic, and that didn't turn out so well.
Maybe if he showed up. Okay, let's just do the four, and so okay, let's do Fred, Gary, OG, Pascal, and Scotty.
Okay. Yeah. You want to take three? I'll take two. Whoever you don't name, I'll think of a bird.
All right. Let's go with Gary. I'll go with a peacock because.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a flashy guy. He's very pretty. What else we got? We got. How about for Fred? We can go with like an eagle, because he's like this like cool, like proud leadership kind of guy. This is off the top of my head, so it might not make any sense. One more. Okay, how about for Pascal? Let's go with like an ostrich because they both are like big and fast, and they get like unnecessary slander.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, for OG, I think OG has a longer wingspan than Scotty. Do you know that off the top of your head? They're both obviously.
I think they're pretty similar. They're both like 7'2", 7'3".
I think OG's is 7'3", so I'm gonna go with OG, but an albatross, because an albatross has the longest wingspan of any bird. I think it's almost like I think it's between like 10 and 12 feet, I think. And and for Scotty, let's say, I don't know, a pelican, so he can fit more beans in his mouth. I don't know.
More beans. Nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's okay. So a pelican for Scotty, albatross for OG, and then we have an ostrich. What are the other ones?
We got ostrich for Pascal, peacock for Gary, and the eagle for Fred.
Yeah, that works pretty good. Is there like could Fred be like a penguin?
Penguin? Well,
since he doesn't fly, like, and he's ground bound.
That's probably better than mine. Do they have like strong little thick penguins?
A hardy penguin. If there's a hardy penguin, listener, just assume that's what Fred is. There's a lot of land-bound creatures that you can compare Fred to.
Drop your penguin facts in the comments.
Yes. Any penguin facts are welcome. That feels like a podcast, Goose. Is there anything you would like to say before we get out of here?
Not that I can think of. No.
Nothing? Not anything. Nothing to plug? You don't want anybody to go to darko.com and introduce the gospel?
If you want to look at Darko, then yeah. How about we can talk about, I'll just do a reverse. I'm going to switch it up and plug Samson. Be like, hey, check out what Samson's doing. He has some great articles coming up. He just dropped one on zone and why the Raptors zone offense sucks. So yeah, check that out.
Yeah, I'll take the opportunity to jump off of that actually. This Friday, so a few days from when you're listening to this, I will have a piece that I think a lot of people have been interested in. It's something I've talked about probably more than anybody else, but it is the burgeoning synergy of Pascal Siakam and Scotty. And I will have a big piece on what that means for those two and how it's looked this year and how it might look into the future. So if you're interested in those two players or the success of the Raptors, I think that should factor in pretty well. And as far as, follows on Twitter, there are basically 3 people on Raptors Twitter. Well, I guess like 4 people, right? There's 6-man, who his meme game is obviously extremely strong. And then there's myself, yourself, and Dana. So if you're somebody who kind of likes, ridiculous memes and especially like on point, deep in the bag memes, Goose will give you that on his Twitter account. It's phenomenal, but also you'll get just genuinely really great basketball insight with whatever he's willing to share on the timeline. So he's one of the people I most enjoy talking to about basketball. And I don't know if he'll talk to you, but you'll certainly be able to see the things that he thinks about basketball on like a day-to-day
I will
basis.
Talk. The DMs are open, as they say.
Oh, okay. There you go. You can fly right in there in the little chicken coop. Okay. Yeah, Goose. Thanks for coming on, man. It's been a blast.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And big shout out. So listener, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. This was probably the longest one I've done in a few months, actually. Speaks to all the stuff Goose and I
we always do long ones.
Yeah. them's the breaks, it's like you enjoy yourself. There's so much basketball to talk about. And, of course you have to make time for all the bird stuff. How could you go without the bird stuff? So listener, thanks for tuning in, whether you got into it in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day and goodbye.